Good evening. So, let's see. I understand that there is a book club organized by Jono. So what happened was a few months ago, I came across this book. So I recommended to Jono, hey, your book club should do this book. He shot the arrow back at me. Why don't you do the review? So that's how we ended up here today. So today I will give a presentation or review of this book by this author called Robert Wright. The title of the book is quite daring. It's called Why Buddhism Is True. If I were to give a title, I wouldn't dare to put this in Singapore, especially in the Singapore context. But then since it's his book, and this book is a New York Times bestseller, on the New York Times bestseller list. Okay, and to jump ahead, I would strongly recommend that you read the book. Since this is recorded, I'm going to put on YouTube. I do not know whether Robert Wright will actually go and see my review of his book or not. So I want to say up front, if I say anything wrong, it's, the mistake is solely mine. Okay. So this is the author, Robert Wright, and he's currently a full-time author as well as teaching in Princeton University. So he stays in Princeton, but he's from Oklahoma, and he runs two blogs, meaningoflife.tv and bloggingheads.tv, and they're quite active. And being in the Princeton area, that is the west coast, east coast of the U.S., and being in the U.S. itself, he has access to a number of meditation teachers and so on. So you see, names of Western authors that you read will get interviewed by him because just proximity, he has access to them and he knows them. So it's quite interesting. And he talks about a lot of things in his blog. Some Buddhism related, some not Buddhism related, and in general. So I got to know, before that, what makes this book interesting? I should have flipped that too. But anyway, so what makes this book interesting, of course, is the daring claim. The claim is that he's going to show how Buddhism is true by referencing to modern science, but in a slightly different way. I think you've seen some books on science and Buddhism, I've even seen books about, how Buddhism is related to quantum physics, this and that. I generally try to stay away from that sort of things because I find the claims quite far-fetched, for one thing. Second thing is I don't understand enough about quantum physics to say whether it's true or not true. Okay, but certainly there's this a lot of attempt to relate science with Buddhism, and I can see why. I'm trained in science and engineering. I can see why this is the sort of the buzzword of modern day. So you want to somehow be related to it. The cool thing to do. So, but this is not a book of that nature. It is also not a book about New Age, touchy-feely kind of thing, be positive, how meditation make you more positive, bring you better relationship, know your girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife better, nothing like that, okay? So it's also not about this. In fact, the book deals with, in its own ways, the central doctrines of Buddhism. And that's why I found it an interesting book or important book to review. It talks about meditation. In fact, it talks about the author's experience with meditation retreat. And from the description in the book, it seems like he has gone for a number of very long retreats. And he talks about his own personal experience there. It talks about dukkha, anatta, and shunyata, and how all these are related to his personal experience during the retreat, as well as his understanding of modern psychology, which we will get to. It's one of the important themes in the book. Yeah? So the part about his personal experiences, very hard for me to bring it across. It's very engaging, it's humorous, it's meandering, so it's hard to give a review of that sort of thing. What I can do is to talk about the ideas. So I cannot talk about his personal experiences and so on. You got to read the book. And I tell you, it's very interesting. He's certainly a very well-trained writer and journalist. So he tells stories very engaging. You know, you listen and you will connect with his story, kind of thing. I can't bring that experience in a book review. So I can only deal with the ideas. So background. The background is important. I got to know this author through this particular book, which I also strongly recommend that you read. Okay, the book is called The Moral Animal, and Why We Are the Way We Are. And it was published in 1994, and from the description, it wasn't clear from the book, but it was implied sort of in his writing in the book that we're reviewing, not in this book, what we're reviewing, that the author first is and foremost is a evolutionary psychologist. So we talk about what is evolutionary psychology. And then he stumbled upon Buddhism. In fact, he made this assertion in the book that he found that science explained the way we are, okay? But he wanted more. He wanted, so what can we do about the way the things, what can we do about it? What can we do about the way we are, okay? So, so to start, I will give a brief introduction of this very interesting and also very engaging book. I forgot how I come to pick up this book. But after reading the first few pages, I couldn't put it down. His writing was very engaging, and it actually talks about the life of Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin, we all know, right? So Charles Darwin, his life, the theory of evolution, and so on. And it's very interesting. For example, you know, Charles Darwin actually married his first cousin, very closely related, the wife. And Charles Darwin's wife is from the Wedgwood family. How many of you know Wedgwood, the famous ceramic, right? They make ceramic. So very well-to-do family. So, and this sort of piqued his interest in close kin marriage and what will happen to the offspring. At that time, genetics and all these things not known, right? So how come, you know, not so nice things happen, right? With close kin marriage and so on. And then he talks, he goes on to discuss using into the private life of Charles Darwin, which is also very interesting. And then all these things came to be, how he, as well as the scientific aspect. So the topic of this particular book is evolutionary psychology. And evolutionary psychology is, I picked it up from the web, is a theoretical approach to psychology that attempts to explain useful mental and psychological traits based on the theory of, or not the theory, I mean, by theory it actually means what we do know now, the scientific theory of natural selection. So you all heard about evolution, right? Behind the theory of evolution actually is the very important concept of natural selection. This process where the survival of the most adaptive, right? Survival of the fittest kind of thing. In the book, he also make it a bit clear. It's not really survival of the fittest. It's survival of the one that can adapt you, as long as you can adapt to the situation. So this is the premise of evolutionary psychology. Yeah? That if we take it that human beings were not created instantaneously, boom, like this, and someone came down from the mountain with tablet, and then these are the 10 laws, and here comes your ethics, this was how it's codified, then we have to take it that if we go by the theory of evolution, human beings are evolved, right, from lower beings onwards. So too was our psychic, our psychology. Our mind cannot possibly have been instantaneously Chinese traditional thinking. You know, this sort of thing cannot have happened. It must have evolved. And if we examine the process of this evolution, we find, interesting enough, what are the roots of morality? What are the roots of ethics? You know, why did we choose a particular rules to be our ethical basis? You know, some things are quite clear: do not kill. Right? If you go around murdering each other, our society cannot possibly survive. So some things are clear, but more subtle things, it turns out, can be explained using evolutionary psychology. Now, in evolutionary psychology, the key principle is natural selection. And what is natural selection? Natural selection is this a process of propagating the genes to the next generation. Okay? So propagating the genes to the next generation. This, according to evolution and evolutionary psychology, is the primary purpose of life. You might think that, okay, meaningless, right? But then that's meaning or no meaning is what you put into it. But the primary purpose of life is just to propagate itself to the next generation. Okay? So a few interesting corollaries jump out from this. First is that, and we'll discuss a bit more about it, natural selection is actually not interested in our happiness. Happiness is, you will see what's the purpose of happiness. Happiness is not the central goal of natural selection, because it's just to propagate to the next generation. Not even survival. Some animals will surrender themselves to be eaten by their young. Okay, or the male will, after mating, immediately allow the female to eat it. Okay, this is the praying mantis and so on. So all this is for the purpose of propagating the genes to the next generation. Very powerful. So we have to bear this in mind, that the purpose of the driver, the main driver, is this: we're designed by natural selection to do certain things that helped our ancestors get their genes into the next generation. Okay, this second phase is also important. How do natural selection learn, as it were? By the success of what was previously done. So if it was helpful to our ancestor, then we sort of uptick it and give it a bit more strength, and it gets propagated down to the next generation. So in the book, he actually gave a number of very interesting examples of what it can explain. For example, monogamy. So monogamy is one man, one wife kind of arrangement. We all know that it is very recent. Monogamy is very recent. Even some of our ancestors, I know people whose fathers have had more than one wife. Okay, so it's very common just in the previous generation. Never mind about today. You never hear of it, except maybe in Muslims. But then in general, we don't hear about it. Okay, so and This has to do with the reproduction strategy of the different sex, the male and the female. Okay? So the male reproduction strategy is actually quite simple. Propagate the genes. Okay? And therefore, the males has a tendency to be very huaxing, to go after lots of women, because that is the driver behind that is the gene propagation strategy. For women, it's different. You have one precious baby in your womb, and you want to secure the resources to guarantee that baby's survival. Okay, so a lot of interesting stuff. Again, I say in the book. For example, that affect the psychic of men and women. For example, men can seldom ever can be 100% sure that the child is yours. Men can never be sure. On the other hand, women are 100% sure the child is hers. Okay, so given this, it fires up certain anxieties in the two sexes very differently. Okay, so for example, how come in the past men can have many wives? Men can many wives. The wives actually tolerate that from happening. Okay, so because of this strategy, as long as I can secure the resources for my baby, it's okay. I don't care whether this man is having another baby with another woman or not. Okay, even today, I know of friends who get into this sort of nasty situation, right? And you will see that the woman is willing to tolerate an affair by the husband much more than a husband is willing to tolerate the affair of the woman. Okay? If it's the other way around, the guy will probably kill the wife. Okay? We've seen it happening many times. But if it's the other way around, the wife is, as long as you bring home the bread and all that, I'm willing to tolerate up to a certain extent. So this explained in the past of how come, because in the past, society was not evenly distributed, resources was not evenly distributed. It's concentrated in certain leaders' hands. Certain people have more resources than others. Today, we are talking about income inequality and that actually is kacang putih compared to in the past when the rich was really rich and the poor you really eat sewage kind of level. So this kind of gap was very significant in the past. So to secure this resources, they acted very differently. Okay, but how come monogamy happened? Any guesses? Yeah, talking. Any guesses why monogamy happened? Some of you might say, okay, it's because women now have more economic power, so they partly it's true. They do not the resources that they need to secure for their baby, they actually can do it on their own. Okay, a lot of single mothers and so on. But there's an argument, I forgot the full argument already, but there's statistics and argument to show that monogamy happened because males became more equal. Okay, males financially became more equal. There was no very sharp division where you have the head male and then the rest below. Even today in very poor rural society, the very rich person in the village probably have several wives, and then those below cannot find any wives at all. Okay? But once that hierarchy is gone, then it's no longer acceptable to have this uneven distribution. So this is one thing. But the whole thing casts to the, and it's clear when we talk about addiction. The whole thing casts to the fact that evolution, I said evolution happens slowly, okay? It's not, we instantaneously acquired ethics and morals and that sort of thing. This is an evolved thing. So evolution evolved in a setting that is very different from what we are today. So we always say our civilization, Chinese civilization, 5,000 years history, right? But true humans has inhabited Earth, I last checked Wikipedia, about 200,000 years. So 5,000 years out of this 200,000 years is still very short, out of this 200,000 years. And if you count the various forms of human-like creatures before the modern human came onto the scene, we are talking about a couple of million years. So during this very long time, we live in the hunter-gatherer society, what is called the hunter-gatherer society. We don't have cities yet. Even though today we look at the history book and say, oh, 5,000 years we have cities and all that. This urbanization happened very recently and very sporadically. Not like everybody living in the city kind of thing. Even in the outskirt area, people will be living in communities and all that. What does it mean? You will live in a village where everybody knows everybody. And you also live in a setting where one village is competing against another village for food, for resources. So in this kind of setting, where technological level is very low, it actually explains some of our problems today. Addiction is a big problem today. And some of the addiction is very subtle. Addiction to sugar and salt, for example. So sugar and salt are actually very precious commodity in the past, right? You know a bit about Chinese history. In the past, if you smuggle salt, it's a capital offense. Only the emperor is allowed to sell salt. Anyone else, okay? So it's because it's so precious, and it's important for the well-being of the body. Okay, so over this long period of time, we have acquired the propensity to, once we get hold of sugar or get hold of salt, to want to have a lot of it, to want to have as much of it as possible. But these days, the problem is sugar and salt can be produced in how much you want, how many kilo you want. Okay, I can produce that at very cheap rates. Okay, so this gives rise to this problem. Okay, so let's get to the book. So the evolutionary psychology says that we have evolved, our emotions and so on, our morals, in fact, have evolved through the centuries. And it comes to, so what has that got to do with Buddhism? And how many of you watched The Matrix, the movie? I think most people have watched the Matrix movie, okay? So it's very closely related to Buddhist ideas if you haven't. And the thing about the Matrix is that we are living in a world of delusion, which is exactly what Buddhism says. We are living in a world of delusion. And the first thing that, or one of the first things that he tackles is, pleasure. So pleasure fades. And why does pleasure or happiness fade? And why dukkha, right? The first characteristic. Why is there dukkha? Simply because natural selection doesn't want us to be happy all the time. They want us to be happy short period of time as a motivation for wanting more, doing more. So it's a reward mechanism. Happiness is a reward mechanism. It is not meant to be permanent. Because if it's permanent, then what's the point? No need to do anything else already. No need to try for anything else already. So happiness can never be permanent. And natural selection makes sure that even after we get what we want, exactly the thing, when we're happy for the time, the happiness will wane. Exactly, you have exactly everything that you have asked for, the exact thing that you asked for right in front of you. You just need to hold it and take as time comes by, the joy or the happiness of possessing that thing will fall. Okay, is natural. So the other big secret is that natural selection. Remember, the purpose of natural selection is to propagate the genes, right? So the other big secret is that natural selection has no qualm about lying to ourselves, lying to us about things. Okay, the presentation, how we see the world and so on, as long as it is conducive to propagating the genes, you don't care. Is it real or is it not real? It's immaterial. So the question is, what if we want to go beyond what natural selection has put into us? Okay, and a core theme of the book is feelings. So feelings is very important because feelings is a driver of our delusion. Okay? Feelings is the drivers of our delusion. It helps to hide the intention of natural selection. And the problem with feeling, there are two important problems with feeling. One is called obsolete urges. So obsolete urges, I already mentioned about sugar, right? It is a urge that we have evolved into our psyche, our psychology, but suddenly was made obsolete. The environment for it was made obsolete by the invention of sugar manufacturing technology or salt manufacturing technology. Suddenly that urge becomes obsolete. And it creates all sorts of crazy things, like road rage. So one of the things I talk about in the book is road rage. So which is righteous rage. And you can imagine that in a small hunter-gatherer society, it is important that you be seen as the righteous person, the right person, right? So if an allegation is made against you, you sort of stand up for yourself in order to make sure that everyone knows that you are not this bad person that the other person say you are. Okay, and what's the worst that can happen? You get into a fight. Okay, and what's the worst that can happen in a hunter-gatherer society during a fight? You use your fist. Okay, there's a risk that you can still kill someone, but it's actually quite low. Compared to today, let's say, especially in America, not happy, pull a gun, boom, 99% fatality, right? So, again, it's something that has not caught up with, or even a car. Even a car today, people will get very angry behind the wheels for very simple reasons. Okay, these are triggers that come. The other problem that he highlights is so-called the false positives. So I mentioned that natural selection has no problem lying to us. And so he gave the example of snakes. So suppose you go into a place where people beforehand tell you that, oh, snakes have been found in this area. Okay, then very likely you will see everything as a snake. A rope on the floor, also snake. You know, this your mind will very quickly trick you. Okay, and you feel very worried and so on. The reason for this is false positive. The reason for this is natural selection is preparing you for the 1 in a million chance that it is indeed a snake. Never mind that you got it wrong 999,999 times. Not important. At most you get a fright. But in the event that it is really a snake, this might have saved your life. Okay, so we get into a lot of this type of problems, misidentifying the situation. So 3 points on feelings. Our feelings were not designed to depict reality accurately, even in our natural environment, even naturally. The fact that we're not living in a natural environment makes our feeling less reliable guide to reality. Okay, and then like I say, there's a lot of ideas discussed in the book. One of which is the happiness delusion. We tend to overestimate how good a thing will feel and how long the pleasure will last. Okay, this happens to all of us. And the reason is it's a motivation for us to continue to try for something. Okay, imagine you have a real assessment that actually when I get this, pass this exam, get this piece of paper, so what? 过来人啊, those of you who have been there before, right? You tell your kids, we've been there already. What was this piece of paper? But when you are there, you see it very differently because the motivation is very different. So, actually, I'm already starting a bit late. In the very first chapter of his book, he already talk about Buddhist meditation. And he feels that the goal of Buddhist meditation is to get to the roots of the delusion, which I cannot complain, right? This is the goal of Buddhist meditation, as well as to do something positive about it. So he started out by saying that he went through these things of evolutionary psychology and so on, and explains how things are. But what if I want to change things? How do I fight all these urges? And towards the end of the book, he makes an important point why fighting these urges are important, especially today. Especially today. So the tools that he feel, and I cannot disagree, for fighting this or getting to the root is mindfulness meditation. Okay. He also reminds people that today mindfulness meditation is very commercial. How to be a mindful manager, how to be a mindful husband and be happy and all that. So there are all these things being sold commercially, right? But he reminds us all, and I think it's also an important point for us today, that the goal of Buddhist meditation is more than all these small bits of more effective husband, more effective business leader or anything of that sort. Okay, is to get to the root of the delusion, is enlightenment. The project has a very lofty goal, way beyond what these commercial mindfulness gurus are trying to sell. Okay? Along the way, yes, you will gain more peace and all that, but these are just side effects. But don't lose sight of the ultimate goals. And he talked about a little breakthrough he had in his first meditation. So kind of lucky also that during his first meditation retreat, he has a kind of a breakthrough which sort of inspired him to go further, investigate further. So his breakthrough went something like this. So during one of the meditation session, just before the session, he drank a bit too much coffee. And he has this problem that coffee tends to tense up his jaw, cause tension in the jaw. So during the meditation, whole meditation session, he was feeling very uncomfortable at the jaw. And he was really struggling to the point, feeling this discomfort. Should I get up? Should I go away? Why am I doing here? And all these things. And then, for some reason, he decided, okay, let me try to meditate on this discomfort. And what he found was that he was able to detach himself from the discomfort. He realized something that probably if you have meditated enough, you would also have seen it. This lofty, this observer consciousness, looking at this feeling that arises, noticing the feeling that arises. Okay, so this triggered him into he called it an important breakthrough. He never had experienced such out of body experience kind of thing. You're observing your own feeling. He knows that you're there, right? You know that this is your jaw giving you that feeling, and still you're able to observe it as a third party, as it were, kind of thing. So he started to investigate, and the doctrine of non-self start to come up very naturally. So the doctrine of non-self, of course, is very important, crucial to Buddhism. The Buddha, after his enlightenment, the first sermon is the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. He taught the Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path. But immediately following that I think I have to ask Bhante, I think it's the night or the next day, he preached the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the second sermon. So the second sermon talks about no self. I think most of you will probably have heard of it, may not have formally known that it's Anatta Lakkhana. The Buddha asked the monks, is name and form yourself? Do you have control over it? And so on, the questions, right? And like this, he goes through the 5 aggregates. Okay? Is consciousness yourself? Is perception yourself? Is feeling yourself? Is and so on, okay? Forgot the 5, okay. So he went through the 5 aggregates and he asked, is this any of this the self? And the conclusion from the monk, or the reply from the monk, was that no, this is not the self, right? And he saw this deep link to meditation, because the feeling of tension, not self. At one point it was me, I was feeling very uncomfortable and so on. But yet you are able to switch into a different mode and observe it dispassionately, that this is feeling, the feeling has arisen in me, this is not me. So he talks about, introduce the audience to non-self, which I won't bother. I assume you guys all very well-read the Buddhists. So he introduced the audience into non-self. But then very quickly you run into the problem of, then who is the observer? Then who attains enlightenment? Okay? And he admits that he doesn't know, but there are various positions that Buddhist teachers have taken. Okay? And one of this is that he considered it a non-standard view, but he subscribed more to it, which is that there is some kind of self, the observer consciousness, or the thing that attains enlightenment. But certainly it is not the self that we, on our day-to-day basis, it's not that self. Right? That egocentric self is something that is very different. So our egocentric view of the world. He also talked about emptiness, and emptiness is essenceless, and this gets later on to the message later on. But he distinguished between, I think Mahayana Buddhism tends to lump everything into emptiness, non-self as well as non-essence of the external world into emptiness, but he distinguished between the two. So, okay, self-deception. So this self that we are so used to constantly lie to us, to ourselves. For example, this is very interesting. We think we are better on average at not being biased in thinking that we are better than average. Agree? Most of us think that we are very objective. Myself is very objective. Okay? So this was a conclusion of a study, by the way. There's I forgot the details of the experiment. There's a study. They put the subjects through a certain kind of test, and then this was the conclusion. Right? We tend to value ourselves more. Even when overall, let's say in a team, even when the team fails, we also say that we are more important. Whether or not we express it is always there. So that's the first thing about the self-deception. this ego, that this value of ourself. Okay, this is one thing. The second problem with self-deception is this the need to reconcile ideas and observation. So he referred to the split brain experiments. So in the 60s, they are apparently, I couldn't find the references, but apparently there were patients whose the connection between the left and the right hemisphere was cut. So there's no connection between the two hemispheres. Okay, and then they found that in general, these people are still okay. They are still able to live their normal life. The reason they cut the connection surgically is these people tend to have severe seizure. So as part of the procedure, they do this thing. I need to check out the reference, but that was, he alluded to that. Then what happened was, you do this experiment. You put a separation in the middle of the face, and then you show the right eye something, and you show the left eye another thing, and you ask the person, what did you see? Okay? And you will find that the person will struggle to come out with a coherent story of what he saw. Right? This is very interesting. So, if we reflect back a little bit into our own life, we see that if we come upon things that are contradictory, it disturbs us. Normally speaking, boleh tai ji wan, but just because it is contradictory, it disturbs you. You know that this thing I cannot reconcile the two. Okay, and your brain will always try to come up with a theory that will somehow accommodate both. Okay, so the brain is very good at coming up with stories to try to reconcile all these differences. Okay? Why is that? Then again, there's a benefit to this self-delusion, which is we give others the impression that we are a coherent and consistent actor, and we have things under control. Okay? So you can imagine, remember self-selection, natural selection is to pass on your genes. So you get resources from various people, one of which is trust, one of which is allocation of various things. And if you're not a coherent person, we tend to shun the person away. So it's important to appear coherent, to appear to have resolved all these issues that you have, especially university professors. So to our students, we cannot be wrong one. So have to, even if wrong, also must come up with theory to explain it. Now, then comes the next important theme of the book, which is this current theory called the modular theory of the mind. Okay, so the mind, according to this theory, consists of modules. Now, this is an extension of the physical anatomy of the brain. When people started studying the brain, they realized that the brain consists of, parts of it responsible for sight, parts of it responsible for sound and smell and all these things. We know that medically today. So people started theorizing that then parts of it must be responsible for, our self-preservation, parts of it must be responsible for our, and so on, that there are these compartments in the mind. Okay, part of it is proven to be not true. They were unable to find the compartments, such compartments. But still, a variant of this theory survive and is very interesting. So there are modules in our mind that interplay, and this is very important. There is no CEO in the mind. There's no controlling factor in the mind. The CEO is missing. Then how do you explain human behavior? So first, some examples of modules. We have a cheat detection module. So we're very good at detecting lies and bullshit, right, as it were. It's fundamental. Self-preservation, mate acquisition, lust, jealousy, and so on. So there are these negative modules. There are also positive modules, right? So compassion, generosity, and all this. These are things that come that comes up. Okay, and how does the module operate? So you can see this as his modern Abhidhamma, okay, how the mind operates, modern Abhidhamma. So based on a certain background feeling, okay, and the background feeling is important. Research has found that on exactly all the same factors, decision making, how to bias someone in decision making, on exactly all the same factors, if you bias the mood of that person, the decision that comes out will be affected. Okay, so like I always tell my students, you must write legibly. I must be able to make up your writing in the exam script, right? And I always then follow that with a warning. If you don't, then depending on my mood, you get whatever points you get. Okay, so it's like that. It's depending on my mood. Okay, so there's a background mood. So based on certain stimuli, depending on the external environment and what came up, the modules will come out. And example of a module that he gave in the book, chocolate. So he says he's very fond of chocolate. So one of the modules that come out is, chocolate, one, grab, eat, right? But the other modules that come out and say, no, for long-term health, it's better that you don't eat the chocolate, right? So it's like, he also make the thing that it's not Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of thing, but both coexisting in the mind. And this is very important. There's no hierarchy in the modules. None of the modules are more important than the other. They just come out, and they find that it's very random. Then the modules, what they do is, the modules themselves undergo natural selection. Each of the modules will evoke their own feelings, evoke certain feelings. Okay, so the craving for chocolate will evoke sensory pleasure, and then the other will evoke other kinds of feeling, that you look better or whatever, you're more healthy, you live longer kind of thing, right? You abstain from the chocolate. So the feelings are evoked by this module, and the feelings will sort of battle it out and decide which is the dominant module that wins. That is your decision, right? And once the bubble, these bubbles start boiling, once the winning bubble is sort of, Toto, they draw, once the winning bubble comes up of all the bubbles, the mind will take ownership of it and rationalize it and explain it, why this is the decision and so on. So the mind rationalizes and owns the winning module. So previously, the Platonian, Plato suggested this, that yes, there are all these things that come out in the mind, but then our rational self will decide which is the more correct one, and we go with that, right? So the current theory is that there's no rational self that decide. It's all emotion. Everything at play is emotion, and it's dependent on background emotion, dependent on the emotion that was evoked by all these modules, who gets to win. Okay, so this brings us to the next message, which is that feeling governs reason. It's not the other way around. Our feelings is a precursor to our reasoning. Reasoning is just a way of presenting to the world why I chose this. Because the world deserves an explanation, or no. Because we want to appear as rational beings. So the Buddha already say, right, there's no I behind the five aggregate. There's no I behind the feelings. So deliberation or thinking about things is usually almost a rehearsal for presenting one's decision. And this is the important part where natural selection also comes in. Conditioning. So the winning module carries more weight into the future. It will evoke more weight into the future. So through this conditioning, you tend to favor certain modules or certain thought patterns than others. So as a sidetrack, he actually brought up this Berkeley method for dealing with addiction, that you need to recognize your feeling, accept your feeling, investigate, and promote non-attachment to the feeling. Work with the feeling. Okay, self-control is about the feeling. He actually don't like this word. He demolished this idea of self-control. There's no self that's in control. It's all just about feelings playing with one another. So you want things to be favored in a certain way, work with the feelings. Now, this is where emptiness comes in. There is no inherent essence or meaning to things. So our attribution of values or stuff, or feelings towards certain things is strictly delusional. It's based on what we have in the past experienced and the things that the values that we give to it. Just the other day, someone showed me this very expensive Balenciaga bag, right? That looked like an IKEA shopping bag, that kind of thing, selling for, I don't know, $4,000 or $5,000, right? So there's no value to it. It's just whether I can invoke that kind of module in you or not, the thought, the feelings in you or not. And this is the point I think also a lot of teachers of emptiness would tell you, that recognizing this actually frees us. There are many people who are very worried that if things don't have value, then what am I living for? What am I doing this? And so on. But actually, if you know the fundamental truth, it will set you free to be able to assign your values appropriately to the things. So in particular, in Buddhism, we always say, 拿得起放得下. So when we want something, we give it that value, but we equally can take away that value at the right time. Don't want, no need already. I have no value for this. And this allows us to deal with adversity. So, and then he went on with the 12 links of dependent origination. Now, he himself characterized himself as a Western Buddhist. And he actually said in the book that he thinks a lot of Eastern Buddhism is superstition. Most of Eastern Buddhism is superstition. He only chose to focus on the core aspect of Buddhism. So it's from what he said, it seems like he doesn't believe in karma or rebirth. He doesn't believe in the hierarchy, 6 realms and all these things. He thinks not important. So he mentioned the 12 links, and in fact he says that the first few and the last few links he thinks not sure, or at least is not clear. But the important thing is what happens in the middle. And he says that the Buddha basically nailed it in this middle sequence. That perception triggers feeling. And feeling triggers craving. Craving triggers clinging. Okay? And in there, it's not an I that control this feeling or this perception in a particular way, but it just things that gets triggered. Okay? It's dependent on this thing happened. So he quoted Bhikkhu Bodhi, very important to me, like central message here, which is, it is between feeling and craving where the battle will be fought, okay? Which will determine whether bondage will continue indefinitely into the future or it will be replaced by enlightenment or liberation. So, do we get dictated by our feelings? Okay, so the feelings arise, do we get led away and continue to be deluded by our feelings. And if we don't, then at least for that short moment, liberation. Okay? If we do, we're in delusion. Okay? So, in summarizing, he says that the human brain is a machine designed by natural selection to respond in a very reflexive way to sensory input. And if you interact with this feeling via tanha, with craving, then you will continue to be controlled by the world around you. If you observe your feeling mindfully rather than just reacting to them, you can, in some measure, escape their control. And you can defy your normal behavior. Okay. So why is this important? Why do you, and the last part of the book, he brings this up. Natural selection has succeeded beyond itself. We are so successful, human beings. We are so successful. Okay, but the things that natural selection has took so many years to build in, the context has changed completely. Okay, the success of natural selection in bringing human beings to the stage it is today immediately negate the stuff that the baggage that we are carrying, the baggage that we have imposed by natural selection. So much so that it's now a threat. Okay? So the changes in the environment has negated the assumption of natural selection. So much so it's a threat. And he thinks one of the biggest threat is tribalism, thinking in terms of my own tribe. Right? And the problem is technology has allowed this to conflicts between the tribes. If the tribal conflict can be settled by a boxing match, okay lah, then I'm sure we will have a lot of boxing match to settle a lot of things, right? But the problem is technology has escalated this indefinitely. Mr. Kim can now drop an atom bomb in the US, and President Trump is also threatening to annihilate the whole North Korean population. So it's sort of like the success has brought us to a stage where we can potentially kill off ourselves. And we need to do something about it. And one of the last few sections in the book is very nicely titled. It says, Saving the World via Clarity. How do we save the world? Via clarity. Clarity about feelings, about our feelings. Okay? At the bottom of this conflict between Kim and Trump are bad feelings. At the bottom of it. You cannot make it go away. No amount of negotiation and talking, diplomacy, whatever, I don't think it can go away without this two-person in control of the button being able to reach some clarity of their own purpose and their own feelings, right? So, in conclusion, he said, why is Buddhism true? It's true because it's coincides so well with what modern psychology has come up with. Okay, so actually, if you go back to how modules work, Abhidhamma, the Buddhist Abhidhamma, is actually fairly close to this, right? That greed, hatred, and delusion drives a certain. We don't talk in terms of these terminologies and take this perspective, but the general flow is there. So there is greed, hatred, and delusion. There is the external stimuli, and this causes all these problems to arise, right? So, and not just that, it is a prescriptive method. So this is what he finds is the strength in Buddhism, that mindfulness meditation actually works. It actually will allow you to gain some control over your own feelings, especially the bad feelings, and then make a choice. Okay, is this what I want? Do I want to get angry? Okay, imagine that, getting angry. Before you get angry, you can actually have the switch to say, do I actually want to get angry? Is this something that I want to get angry about? And other than getting angry, is there something else that I can do about the situation? So these are things that requires us to first have access or have the means to recognize the lower working of our mind. Okay, we all like to think that we are all these rational, higher beings and all this. Actually, no, right? You know Maslow hierarchy of needs. There's still a lot of this very primitive drives that cause us to act or behave in a certain way. And if you are able to get a whole grip on all these things, you will be able to save the world through clarity. So that's all. Thank you very much. And again, just go back to the first slide. This is the title of the book. I bought the Kindle version, then I bought the Kindle version, then I realized I was too lazy. You gave me like 2 months to finish it. I don't have time to finish it. So I bought the audio version. So I just listen in the car. Every time I drive, I just listen to it in the car. So that turned out to be quite fast to finish off a book. Okay, are there any questions or comments? Yes. Sure. But he actually chose not to avoid the topic altogether. He implied that he doesn't believe in it, but he doesn't discuss it at all. It's just not something that he discussed at all, right? Yes, it is important that for Buddhists to see this continuity, this rebirth and continuity, but, you know, they call themselves secular Buddhists. So they're this group of Western Buddhists that holds this view. Yes. Yes. Did I get it correct? I don't know.
It's so profound. I actually, just to let you know, I'm quite new to Buddhism.
Where's the mic? So that others can hear you as well. Below, I think you have to on it.
I'm quite new to
The button below. Is it on?
Anyway, I'll just say that the book itself is so profound. This is one man's view, okay?
Yes, certainly.
And it being one man's view, I would like to know for maybe the Bhante or perhaps yourself. I mean, of course you've read it, but my question is, being a meditator for a long time, all the detailed descriptions that he gave of his experience, are they what you would have come across yourself?
I think a lot of meditative experience is generally very personal, and different people will have different experience. But certainly, I think the part about detached observation of your feelings and your other body process is a valid one. Certainly, that is the case. You can observe that.
Because it has sort of pushed me over the tip to try meditation.
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
before, all that was too up there. Whereas his book made it more accessible.
So he actually say that he don't know whether enlightenment is possible or not.
Yeah.
So and he's frank in admitting that, and he sees it as little small steps to indicate that we are heading in the right direction. We can't say for sure whether the goal is indeed possible or not, but there are little steps that are heading in that direction. Yeah. So and it's very interesting. For example, a lot of time during meditation, you will feel peace, but some people get very settled into the bliss part of it, but it's not about feeling blissful. That's not the end goal. The end goal is always vipassana, insight. Insight into what? Insight into the working of our mind. Insight into the very lowest level of how exactly the stuff that he described, how the feeling guide our, propel us to do things that in one way or the other, the ability to notice these things. Yeah, and I think, for example, he said working about his going through the toothache and all this, you work with gross feelings first, then you slowly, hopefully, can progress to more subtle or more difficult areas, difficult feelings, and so on. Yeah. Yes.
Related to the non-self, in the slide of non-self, you have this question: but who is the observer and who attains enlightenment? The answer is it mine?
So he doesn't say, and he says that he's not sure also. He doesn't know how to answer that question also. And I also have to say I do not know how to answer this question. Okay, but certainly that is the experience that you are able to observe this arising and of feeling and the passing away of feeling. And then that's the interesting part. In the scripture, you will read that the Buddha saying, when he does this, he gains final liberation, gains enlightenment. Now, who is the he that gains the enlightenment? The Buddha also doesn't say. But you see, this my own interpretation is not important. This part is not important. At best, it is a philosophical answer, and we cannot tell whether it is true or false. What is more important, what is more concrete, is observing the arising of your thoughts, observing the arising of your feelings as a dispassionate third-party kind of observer. That is certainly doable. That is achievable.
Okay. So, I mean, when you observe, meaning you pay consciousness to it, right?
Mm.
You mean this is
pay attention to it, yeah.
I mean, you raise consciousness, and the third party is the one that raised the conscious.
Somehow, probably, if you follow his module idea, one of these module is the one paying attention to the other module, right? So you have this happening in your mind as well. Maybe you can write to him and ask him whether he has any new observation or not.
Okay, thank you.
There was a question from behind.
This out of the body experience, I did experience once. Yeah. So I was sitting, doing meditations, and then I feel very light. I felt that I was floating, and then I could observe myself sitting there. It's a very blissful experience. And then just for a fraction of seconds, you're back to normal. That's what I experienced.
Yeah, so that certainly it is possible, and many people have described that kind of experience. Yeah. But the experience of observing the arising of feelings and so on, it's not quite that, you know. It's not quite that. You actually, I don't know how to describe it, but you actually see your feeling coming. For example, he talked about toothache. Toothache actually comes with pulses. I don't know whether you observe it or not when you have a toothache. You know, it's somehow synchronized with the beat of your heart kind of thing. And you can actually see it coming and going in this pulses. And so that is the kind of observing that it's not like observing your whole body from a distance. I mean, I'm not putting your experience down. There are many people who have experienced that, but that's not what he's describing. Okay. Yes. Because we're recording this, so otherwise you.
There was one bit towards the end when you mentioned how, not about the toothache, but some pain in the leg and hearing the bird song.
That's right.
Meditating.
That's right.
And you found that
I wouldn't use the. I'm by no stretch of imagination a attained meditator, but that part of the book where he talk about oneness is something that you sort of feel that there's no barrier because this self has dissolved to a minimal kind of thing. So this barrier has gone away. That everything is just arising, falling, and there's no this is this thing or that happening. Is everything is just waves arising and falling, rising and falling. So I think that is the feeling that he's talking about. And he also talked about we, right? So he says at one point he said he had a lot of problem with weeds. He hated weeds in the garden, weeds, the wild grass that grow, because he has a lovely garden. He needs to pull out the weeds, and in the past he used to hate it. Okay, but during one of the meditation session, or during what, it's not actually during one of the session itself, but during one of the breaks in the he was walking around, and he was starting to see the weeds in a completely different light. It's no longer something that evokes hatred in him. It's curious, something that you look to. And he was making the point that this thing, therefore, because it's empty, there's no weed is not inherently evil. That to evoke this feeling in you, this was some bad connection that happened in the past, reinforce certain modules in your mind. But you can work with that and deal with that, and the weed comes as in totally new light. And he was, I think, alluding to how you can deal with bad situation, bad people. We always think that so and so evil, so and so. We label things in this way for the ease of our whatever judgment. We are very quick to jump to judgment, but it's not like that. There's no inherent nature of evil or whatever in things. Right? He even say he has this office problem with this office person that always gets into each other's way, and then he said after a certain long meditation, he was able to go back to the office and smile to this guy. Yeah? Achievement, he said, that's a major achievement. So go for this sort of major achievement in your life. Little by little, things will improve. You will see things happening, and this will help condition your mind accordingly. By nature, our positive modules are very weak, because often, in a cruel world, they are not reinforced. You're generous, somebody take advantage of you. So this, by nature, all this tends to be weak. Our negative modules tend to be very strong, and they evoke very strong feelings. So in our natural mind, we tend to be negative more so than positive. But because of this principle of conditioning, we can do something about it. If we're able to recognize that this is some, how do they say? Let's say you have a colleague that got a promotion, okay, and then actually it's jealousy, but you will think of something to say negative to say about this colleague, and you'll find the justification for it, right? Because this was the winning module. But at the root of it is actually just jealousy. If we're able to work in there, then and recognize it, then we can distance ourselves. This is not what I want, right? And maybe replace that with generosity instead, right? Other question? So I don't get a cut for promoting the book. I paid for the book myself. So, but it's a good book. It's worth to read. and you can try to buy second hand or whatever, borrow from a friend, whatever, and read it for yourself. There's a lot, or like she mentioned, there's a lot of personal experiences. He describes interview with meditation gurus, how they view the world before they have attained certain meditation attainments, and how they view the world later on, right? In fact, you might, the way we say things is like so easy and all that, but for example, one of the modules, one of this evolutionary psychology thing that came to us is kinship, propagation of genes. We are closer to people we have genetic connection to than people that we don't. Okay, so for example, it's well known. First, you are closest to your, and very interesting, it's in the forward direction. So we are very close to our children. We're also genetically very close to our parents, right? But the parents represent the past. The children is the future. So we will invest and sort of treasure our children more so than our parents. Okay, so much so that you need traditional Asian value to come and tell you that you must treasure your parents, kind of thing. But and so one of the issue he tackled is this challenge. So if you meditate, does it mean that after a while you become more detached to your children? You love your children less. So contradiction. But this contradiction is because every one of us are programmed to love our children a lot. So we see anyone who loves their children less as somehow more evil or not acceptable, And he make this point, what if everyone loved their children a little less, but love the world a bit more? Redistribute that love, and not just direct it in very selfish channels. Okay, then the world again will be a very different place if that happens. Other question?
Do you see how with meditation that they propose, do you see that whether it will lead to like Buddhist quietism, that we are less passive kind of person, but it is quite different from like what like Japanese Buddhism, for example.
Right. So actually, he's very anti-Trump, so there's no problem about that. You visit his blog and then you see. So Western Buddhists don't take this as an issue. Even Bhikkhu Bodhi is now very actively. Some accuse him of being a politicized monk. Okay, even people in Singapore, I know of people who accuse him of that. But they take an active interest, if you see it more positively, they take an active interest in society, and they feel the need to change the negativity in the society through promoting mindfulness, as well as reminding everyone where this negativity is going to lead us, right? So I guess it is very much up to the individual how you would do things. So they don't. Western Buddhists they are usually very active. There's no problem with being socially active on this front. Yeah. So quietism is non-issue. But you can be active in one way, you can be active in another way, right? You can be active voice without being a violent voice. Okay, so these are important differences. But where do you draw the line? When does your activism, your passion for something spills over to become something very negative, right? Spills over to become violent. This requires a lot of this ability to understand yourself, your emotions, and your motivations. But the central message of the book is, I feel, very good. It's about understanding the root driver of our negative emotion. okay, and how we can do something about it through meditation. Okay, I guess we'll end here today. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.